In January 2020, just weeks after the Modi government announced the merger of 8 railway services into one, that is, the Indian Railway Management Service, a rare protest by serving officers of the railways broke out. Sitting officers started sending postcards to the Prime Minister's office with the hashtag No to IRMS and Save Indian Railways. Many gave up the protection of anonymity to protest on social media too. An infuriated Piyush Goyal, who was then the railway minister, reacted angrily by telling officers in a closed-door meeting that the government can run the railways without them. Touted as one of the biggest reforms in the railways, the merger was supposed to bring an end to quote-unquote departmentalism. This will end the culture of working in silos and mark the beginning of a new and unified railway with a coherent vision for the future, the government said in a statement at the time. Cut to 2024. As reported by The Print in a story broken this week, the government has gone back to the old model and the reform has gone to dust. For all practical purposes, the Indian Railway Management Service has been demerged into 8 different services again. Except instead of services, they're now called sub-cadres of the IRMS. The U-turn has happened because of an alleged shortage of technical expertise in the officers recruited in the new system. To understand all of this, here's a little bit of a background. As per the pre-reform model, the railway bureaucracy was divided into technical and non-technical services. Now, the non-technical services consisted of 3 services: traffic, personnel and accounts. The officers in these services were recruited through the civil service examination of the UPSC, which also recruits the IAS, IPS, IFS officers, among others. The technical services, on the other hand, consisted of 5 services, whose names you can see on your screen. Officers in these services were recruited through the engineering service examination of the UPSC. Between the civil services and the engineering services, there existed departmental rivalries and one-upmanship. The engineering service officers, for instance, would be recruited at a younger age, giving them a better chance to climb up to the topmost positions in the railways. The civil service officers, on the other hand, would often join the service at a later age, given that they came from the extremely competitive civil service examination. Fewer of them, therefore, would rise to the top. But the civil service officers had the prestige. They came from the same exam as the IAS after all. In 2019, the government thought it would bring an end to all this departmentalism by merging all these services into one service, which would all be recruited through the civil service examination. This was also recommended by the De Broglie Committee report headed by Vivek Deb Roy. The civil servants especially felt the edge that they had over their engineering counterparts of being from the prestigious civil services was taken away from them. They were at the forefront of the protests. The government, however, did not budge. Slowly, the protests died down. But the reform was unraveling from within. For 2 years after the merger, the railway did not make any recruitments. While the reform was announced with great gusto, its logistics had not been figured out. How will the railways ensure technical competence amongst its cadres if it hired everyone from a historian to a math graduate? Where will the engineers come from? Who will manage the hyper-technical operations of the railways like signalling, mechanics or electrics? Alright, many of the officers who joined the civil services have an engineering background to begin with, but did the government have a plan to ensure that only engineers get posted into technical positions and all others in the managerial ones? Even as all these questions remained unanswered, the government began recruiting officers into a unified IRMS from 2022. So far, officers for 2 batches of the IRMS have been recruited in 2022 and 2023, and recruitment of the 2024 batch is currently underway. But here is another catch. None of the officers of the new IRMS have been posted on the ground yet. So how does the government even know that there is a shortage of officers with technical expertise? Surely, to know the drawbacks of a reform, it has to first be implemented on the ground. In what seems like a repeat show of 2020, probationers who have been recruited in 2022 and 2023 are protesting again. In August this year, when the talk of the government going back on its reform had reached the probationers, and this was reported by The Print, they shot off desperate letters to the Railway Ministry. They have all been recruited under one unified IRMS. If the government goes on to demerge the services again, what will their future be? How will they be assigned services? Panic struck, some of them are now privately wondering if they should go to court. At The Print, we were the first to report in August that the government is going to demerge the railway services. Incidentally, the Railway Ministry went on record at the time to tell us that there was no such plan. Just over a month later, the government, however, has indeed demerged the services. Instead of calling them different services, however, it has chosen to call them all the IRMS divided into 8 different sub-cadres. Once again, the Railway Ministry is in a state of complete confusion. To be sure, some officers are glad that technical expertise and specialization can return to the railways. Yet others are left wondering, what have the last 5 years of supposed reforms, claims to end departmentalism, and the subsequent confusion achieved? For now, bureaucratic wranglings, vested interests, and departmentalism are back to haunt the railways. You can read more on this in our stories on theprint.in. We will be putting the links in the description box. Thank you so much for watching.